speaker and a thinker. He has been exploring and will explore together with us now the kind of worlds that we want. Please give a huge hand to Tor Nørretranders.
Thank you very much. The title of this talk was chosen long before the tragic events some days ago in Paris, and it would seem a little odd to be giving a talk called "It's a Kind of World" given the events that we've all been following. On the other hand, Louis Armstrong, the jazz musician, made a song that you may have heard of called "What a Wonderful World." And at many occasions he was asked, how can you play a song called "What a Wonderful World" when you look at what's happening around you? And he says, the problem is not the world, the problem is what we are doing to it. And in a sense that is also the point of my talk here. The problem is not the work of the world, the problem is what we're doing to the world. When I was a kid, like half a century ago, I really thought, in my mind, in my understanding, I really thought that the world was a desert. I thought it was scarce and didn't give a lot to human beings. There was basically no food to be found in the world. You could only find food wrapped in plastic in the supermarket. There was basically no water. You had these clever people who could run around with a stick and find water. We had geologists who knew where to drill for water, but water was a scarce thing that we never had enough of. And there was no energy in the world except in some deserts far away where people would drill for oil and stuff and would be constantly fighting over the power game of these scarce resources. So the world seemed like a place that didn't offer us a lot. To get food, you had to work very hard. To get water, you had to dig it up, and to get and also with energy, you had to dig it up from the ground. It was not around in the world. It was something that you had to sort of drag into the world. The world was not kind. It seemed to me as a kid. It was a tight thing that didn't offer anything for free. The world was kind of unfriendly to us. And we were kind of strangers in the world. We didn't really belong here, but because of our hard work and our technology and our plastic wrappings in the supermarket, we could just barely survive. Now that I'm kind of a grown-up, at least in terms of age, maybe not behavior, but as a grown-up, it seems to me that the world is entirely different from what I thought of as a kid. The world is very distinctly different from a desert. There's energy everywhere. All we need to do is to reach out and grab that energy and perhaps store it for later use if it's sunshine in the daytime and we need the electric lighting in the night, or because we shut out the daylight, as we do in many modern buildings, so we need the artificial light up there. We have to store it somehow, but it's all there. Just reach out and grab it. It's flowing through our environment. Water seems to be pouring down, sometimes to an extent that we don't really like. It doesn't come as regularly as we perhaps would like it, but it seems that there's a water cycle going on this planet, and if we are clever enough to take the water that rains down on us, and instead of throwing it in the sewer and further on into the ocean, we maybe use it to water our garden or to make other meaningful use for us, and there's plenty of water. It's basically because we throw it away, and basically because we have a problem like we have with energy and time. We have a problem with water and space, and it's not always where we want it, but we could solve that. There's plenty of water streaming through our environment. And when it comes to food, it turns out that there's a lot of food in the world. This is a front page from the cover from the Time magazine some years ago with the Danish chef Renowed that you know about from Noma. We think of as an elite restaurant, and of course it is an elite restaurant. It's the best restaurant in the world, but it's also the leader of a huge, what you would call, research project going on with most of the top chefs of the young generation of this world, the best cooks of this world, going out and exploring what there is to eat anywhere on Earth. Just 10 years ago, It was like if you wanted to have a good restaurant, you had to get the goose liver from France or the ham from Spain or something very special you had to import. But now it turns out that if you just look where you are, there's a lot of stuff to eat and there's a lot of wonderful stuff to eat. So food is also something that seems far more available than I saw when I was a kid. So the way I see the world now, very, very different from the kid growing up in the suburbs of Copenhagen 50 years ago, is that the world is a flow, a rich flow of energy, of matter, of information that's flowing through our lives and that we have been ignoring for so many centuries that we think it doesn't exist. There's lots of food. I'll return to that because you will probably say, really? There's lots of water and there's lots of energy, and all we need to do is to be friends with the world, to understand that the world is kind, that it is rich, that there's a lot of stuff for us, and that we belong in this world, and that we actually have the skills to get the resources we need and to share with other people the resources we need, but we have to trust our own sensory system. We have to trust our own biological being as creatures who know about this world and belong in this world. But the funny thing is we don't know this. We've been ignoring this for a very, very long time, and we've turned our back to the richness and the generosity of nature, and we have chosen, for odd reasons, a very different strategy which makes us in a situation where we're in constant panic that there's not enough of stuff. We think of the world as unfriendly and unkind, and therefore, in a way, it has become unfriendly and unkind. And we thought that the only way we could survive on this planet was by taking full control of everything on this planet. Basically, we were scared. We were scared shitless, and we've basically been scared shitless for like 10,000 years. And there's a good reason now, because of the declining of the growth of the population of human beings on Earth for the first time in 10,000 years actually, that we now have a little space, a little room for rethinking the whole situation and asking ourselves, do we really need to be so scared of the world? And what would happen if we start embracing and liking the world we are part of? But first we have to understand, why is it that we have been so scared? What is the choices we've made in human history? And basically these are choices made 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, which meant a huge climate change, a huge change in the climate on Earth, a huge change in like the sea levels. The sea levels rose like 100 meters at the end of last ice age, which meant that the paradise, which is a Persian word for a huge garden, was no longer the paradise, but became what we know as the Persian Gulf today. There was water all over, and people had to go out into the mountains and survive somehow, and they, in desperation, they chose weird technologies. In our part of the world, the richest hunting ground in Europe for the hunter-gatherers who lived at that time was Doggerland, which is right between Denmark and England in what is now known as the North Sea. You might have heard about the fishermen going to Doggerbanke. That used to be, that area which is now covered in water, used to be a very rich and fertile ground for hunting. It disappeared because of the natural climate change that happened, and people desperately tried to find strategies, and what they did was that they moved from being hunter-gatherers, which we've been for most of our existence as human beings, into becoming farmers, into trying to control and make sure that there was food for them that they had grown themselves. This also meant a huge change in the strategy, because what hunter-gatherers do and what people in indigenous cultures still do, those who are not entirely part of the industrial civilization, and all our biological brothers and sisters, like the big monkeys, do, is that they live off a huge manifold, a richness of many, many different kinds of fish, many, many different kinds of animals and insects and worms and other things that you wouldn't like to think of as edible, and a huge variety of plants. Several hundred plants would be part of the diet that you could find if you look into like the edibility, a girl from some 1,000 years ago, dug up in a moor in Denmark. You will find that there's a huge variety in what these people eat. And this manifold, this richness, this diversity was collapsed into a very few fish, a very few animals, and a very few plants. that we are now eating. And these are basically the ones that we could tame. So we changed our strategy from going for the wild stuff that grew all by its own. Wild actually comes from the Nordic word will, or vilje, which means that it does so whatever it does out of its own will. It's wild means that it does it for its own sake. Tame means that it does it for our sake. And so we changed the strategy. Instead of believing in the wild stuff that grew out there or was raised out there for its own reason, and we said we want to change stuff, we want to control stuff, and we want to domesticate it, we want to bring it into our domus, our household, and cultivate the plants into plants that we know, that we like, and to domesticate the animals into being in symbiosis with us, as we've done with a few but not very many animal species, most of which were domesticated many, many thousand years ago. We're still there with the cow and the sheep and the pig and the dog and all these domesticated animals, which were basically domesticated by early farmers or late hunter-gatherers. So the strategy we have chosen in terms of ecology is really a strategy of catastrophe. And this is not a value judgment, this is a technical description of what we're doing when we're domesticating plants and doing farming. We are creating a catastrophe with the use of a tool that I used to, at least until about 10 years ago, to see as one of the big achievements of humanity, the plow, or the tilling thing, the thing we use to turn over the topsoil every year so we can plant our stuff. The plow is a really sad instrument that does a lot of bad stuff, but it's a basis of our civilization strategy. And we see the plow as a sort of wonderful achievement of civilization, but the truth of the matter is very different. The truth is that the idea of using a plow is to create a catastrophe every year. You deliberately make a catastrophe. And you do that because you want to get rid of all the optimistic plants. The optimistic plants are like trees or bushes or plants that grow a trunk, that grow a huge root net, that do a lot of things to survive for many, many years and provide stuff for the ecosystem for many, many years. These are the optimistic ones that say, probably there won't be another forest fire or another flooding or another human invasion for some years, so I'll invest some of my resources in building a huge tree. Now the pessimistic plants, they do something quite different. Those are the annuals, those plants who only have the courage to invest in one season, in 1 year. They will say, I put all my energy into producing small grains with DNA, small recipes for making another one of me, and this grain will survive a flooding or a fire, a forest fire or whatever, and make a new plant next year. So these plants are very good at going into areas after a catastrophe because they can very quickly recover, while the trees will take like 10 or 50 or even 100 years to recover after a huge flooding. So the annuals are the ones that are very pessimistic and that you actually try to cultivate by plowing the world. And this has been done to an extent that now 60% of the calories consumed by human beings come from only 4 crops, which are annuals, which are basically grasses, because grass is the basic kind of annual. And the most important kind of grass we eat is the rice, the wheat, and the corn. All of them are grasses, all of them are annuals. And also potatoes, which are not grass, but which we grow in a way that is as if they were annuals, which they are not historically. So we have, from a huge variety of crops, we put all our efforts into just 4 crops that will provide most of the calories for humanity. For a Danish person with all the meat, it's like 50% of the calories. And if we add a number of sister plants, because for instance, there's only one kind of grain here, that's the wheat. There are many kinds of grain, as you know. If we add all of them, it turns out that just 30 crops will provide 90% of the calories of human beings. That means that we are extremely non-resilient, we're extremely dependent on a very few species, and our whole agricultural system is created to sustain the primacy of these very few species. So basically we rape the soil to provide good conditions for these very few plants, And it brings all these problems with the soil blowing away as dust, and the nutrients get lost, and you have compacting, so you cannot grow anything. And the soil is really like the soul of planet Earth in terms of the living system. The soil is 1 meter at the top of the continents, which provides basically for the land-living animals and plants everything. The soil is where the sunlight from the sun comes together with the erosion of the rocks, the minerals from below, from the earth, where the heaven and earth meet and provide this extremely complex ecosystem, which is by far the most complex ecosystem on earth. Now you can calculate that the way we do agriculture means that 1 millimeter of soil is scraped away every year. So an American geologist called David Montgomery made the simple calculation that if there's basically 1 meter of soil on any spot on Earth, that's 1,000 millimeters, it means that 1 millimeter per year, it will be gone in 1,000 years. So for 1,000 years, there's no more soil. The soils are mined away, basically. They're treated as a mine where you just take away stuff. And when there's no more stuff in the soil, the civilization based on that soil will collapse. And the point is, you've seen that to the Mayas, the Incas, the Greeks, the Romans, people in Mesopotamia, and you've seen it in Africa. You've seen it in many, many places. And of course, there are many, many explanations why these cultures disappeared. But the interesting thing is that the average lifetime of cultures on planet Earth seems to be between 500 and 1,500 years. So it does rhyme finally with this 1,000 year estimate. Now, this is a map provided by Jared Diamond, an American geographer and physiologist, who has mapped where agriculture started on this planet. It happened 9 different places, independent of each other, with different kinds of plants, and where agriculture is today. Now, the origin of food production is these rust or dark orange patches, and you will see that it's like the Sahel in Africa, Ethiopia, West Africa, it's Fertile Crescent, which is like Palestine, Jordan, the part of Iraq and Iran, part of Turkey, where the Kurds are. You see Middle America, you see all these places, and you start wondering, this is kind of silly. I mean, why would they start agriculture in the Sahel, which is basically a desert? Why would they start agriculture in this place where they have some oil, granted, for that, but basically all they do is seems to be fighting, and if they're not fighting themselves, they will come and fight them. So, I mean, why would you start agriculture in these kind of places? And of course, the point is, you didn't start agriculture in places which were deserts. You started agriculture in very, very rich and fertile places, but they became deserts because of agriculture. So you had to move agriculture to like Western Europe and other places where you hadn't ruined the soil with the help of agriculture. So this 1,000 year lifetime for civilizations is about the story of turning stuff into deserts. You would say, but our civilization is a bit older. Yes, but we got fertilizers based on fossil fuels, where we try to make up for the nutrients we took out by adding these fertilizers. But you can't do that in the long run, because it's based on fossil energy and also on atoms that we get from fossil sources. So basically, this will run out in a few years' time, and we have to do something radical about agriculture. And this map is really the map of human history, and it's when you start thinking about it, it's really a threat. It really makes you feel uneasy, because the story is that we basically ruined part of this planet. So ironically, the world did become a desert. So in a sense, I was right as a kid, the world is a desert, but that's only because we made it so. And we did so because we lost faith in the planet, and took control, and in a sense we lost our way and our way of doing things. So what should we do? We should basically share our shit. We should share the stuff we make with other living creatures, and we should be happy with the stuff that other human creatures give us. Now this is an ecosphere. This is a small closed bowl of glass, a small glass sphere. There's some water in it. There's a coral that isn't very important here. That's sort of the basis of a reaction going on there. But there are something very interesting here. There are little shrimps swimming around. I have one of these at home. You have these little shrimps swimming around. It's very nice to look at the shrimps. They're kind of boring. But there are also lizards swimming. very nice pet because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to put in any food. You don't have to take out any waste. They'll just be swimming around for years and years inside that closed bowl. And you start thinking, don't they ever go to the toilet? Should they have something to eat? And it turns out that there's not only shrimps in there, you also have algae and you also have bacteria. And they make up for this little wonderful system where you have the shrimps that produce waste that the bacteria will make into nutrition for the algae. They will take in the daylight, they will do photosynthesis, produce food and oxygen. The shrimps will inhale the oxygen, burn the food, exhale CO2 that the algae needs to go on. So you have this little closed system where a particular atom will jump from being in a shrimp to being in a bacteria to being in an algae all the time, and the atoms will be going around all the time. The waste of one organism is the food of another. And of course, our bigger bowl of glass here on the Earth has the same basic boundary conditions, no matter going in, no matter going out. The only thing that comes in is sunlight from the sun, and the atoms will jump around from being at one time in someone from Sweden, sometime in a tree, sometime in a beaver, sometime in an asshole of a little worm or something. So the little atom will be jumping around all the time. And basically it's the same scheme that you have plants and animals and bacteria more general, of course, because it's a bigger bowl of glass. But it's the same basic idea. If you want to be part of this, you have to eat the shit of other organisms and then eat your shit. And if you say you refuse to ingest the shit of other organisms, you can have that position, you can take it. But you must remember that oxygen is really the shit of plants. So if you want to insist not taking in any shit, you can do so for a minute or so and then we'll talk about it. Plants need animals to run around and collect plant stuff and shit it out again as fertilizer. The planet needs us as human beings to be part of this cycle. It's not that we have to excuse we are here. We actually belong here on this planet. We're actually natives of this planet. We were born here and we belong here. And being natives gives us a lot of guidance of how we should behave. Because we have to have these 6 tons of matter going through us every year. It's like 4.5 tons of nitrogen that we just ingest and exhale again. But 1.5 ton, 1,500 kilograms of food and water goes into our mouth every year. It's like 1 kilogram of food per day, 4 kilograms of liquid, of water and stuff per day. And we basically get rid of the same amount through the other openings and our sweat glands. So there's a huge flow of matter through us. And in a sense, we're not things, we're more like flows. And the problem is, why is it that we insist on this enormous flow of matter going through us is something that we should have grown ourselves? Why is it that we can't eat the stuff that's already there? Why is it that we can't just immerse ourselves in this enormous flow of matter and energy and information in the Earth system? Why is it that we don't eat wild foods and perennial plants? That's the opposite of the annuals. That are those with an optimistic strategy for being around for a long time. Why is it we don't do that? How much of it is there in the world? How much wild food would there be in the world if we didn't insist on raking the soil and growing stuff? And the question to this very simple, the answer to this very simple question is that nobody knows. I've asked a lot of people working with plants, with animals, with insects, with how much wild food is there on this planet? Nobody knows. Nobody ever really asked this question. And it's likely that in many areas, many parts of this planet, there's more wild food than the food we humans can grow. For instance, if you take the fields of organic farming in the United States, and you allow people to pick all the weeds, all the non-food stuff, and you ask how many edible weeds, how much weeds you could eat is there on this field as compared to the carrots or whatever you grow. And it turns out there's more biomass that is edible in the weeds than in the actual product. Now, why is it that we ignore that? That's because we want to be in control. And because we made this weird choice 10,000 years ago in a deep crisis that we had to be in control of everything. And the people who made this choice were Stone Agers. They didn't have the science, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have anything of the modern stuff we have. So they made this choice, and for some reason we've been stuck with that choice for 10,000 years. And what you could argue is we should go another way. We should rediscover the wild stuff on planet Earth. We should make the wild stuff edible if it's not already. We should persuade ourselves that if some humans somewhere on the planet can eat this thing as part of their culture, eat beetles or pigs or stuff that other people would say were really weird, then probably biologically speaking we could all eat. So if we make a high-tech Stone Age, we could say we could go back to the many kinds that we eat coming out of solar power, being very healthy to our bodies, as opposed to the industrial agriculture, where it's basically all corn, it's basically all grasses, and it's based on fossil power, which will run out and is very unhealthy to us. But then you ask, okay, but is it nice to eat wild stuff? Could we dream of it? I wrote a book 10 years ago where I said wild stuff is the way ahead, based on human nutrition studies. And I gave many talks, and I was sort of wondering, it's going to taste good enough. Would we really like to eat wild stuff? Is it delicious enough? And I really got a shock some years later when I had a dinner at Noma, the restaurant in Copenhagen, which is the best restaurant in the world, I already mentioned. Everything I was eating was basically wild stuff. And my body started singing. My body started singing, and I tried to understand why is there this concert going on inside my body? How come this? And it dawned on me, it's wild. It's because my body likes something that's wild. And I've since then been interested in working with the chefs of Noma and many other restaurants in the world about their exploration of the edibility of planet Earth. Because what these people do with their skills and their noses and their taste buds is they go out and say, what can we eat here? And some of the conferences, some of the symposia that's been going on at Noma here in Copenhagen have been with 500 chefs coming from all over the world and say, we did the same as Noma did in the Nordic countries. We asked the Amazon Indians, what do you eat? We asked the Maori people in New Zealand, what do you eat? And out of that came fantastic gastronomical stuff. So in terms of the quality of food, there's no question in my mind at all that wild food is much more delicious. But then is there enough of it? And the short answer is maybe we simply don't know. And we are about to explore that. And of course the chefs with the skill at tasting and preparing will be essential in this. Basically what we need is daylight and diversity, the richness of nature and the skills to find out what's there and the courage to try to start eating it. So what I'm arguing here is that we should basically go wild. We should do that in a high-tech fashion, but we should go wild. And this is turning away from the paradigm of 10,000 years. Today we learned there's another strategy being offered, which is not go wild, but go vertical, which is to try to produce the food we need in vertical farming. I'm not so sure about this. I'm not so sure that it's wrong. I'm not so sure that it's right. But I have one essential question to it. Because this strategy of the vertical agriculture is like reinventing ecology in an artificial context, as opposed to the trusting yourself as a native who can navigate in the wild world. And I'm not sure that's a better strategy. I wrote a book some years ago, it was published in 2012 in Danish, about waste, affald. And in this book I ended with a science fiction story of the free town of Christiania, you know, the hippie town where you go to buy your pot in Copenhagen. Christiania has been around for many years, and I make this fantasy about Christiania in 2019 having this enormous conflict between two wings there. One being the landbrug wing, the vertical agricultural wing, arguing that now, because of this vertical agriculture, we can become independent of Copenhagen and Denmark. We can produce all our stuff ourselves, and just we can do all the weeds and then, you know, all the kind of weeds we can do in vertical agriculture, and nobody can interfere with us. We can put up huge walls around us and just say fuck you to Denmark and be happy. And the other wing says, no, we have to be part of the universe, we have to be part of the world, we have to be part of the climate problem, we have to solve things together, we are on this planet together. And these two groups struggle in this science fiction story. And I'm not sure if there's a clear conclusion to that story, because it reflects my own dislike for the idea of isolation, cities isolating themselves but also an acknowledgement that this is fantastic. But the real test for all of this is, how does it taste? I've tasted some hydroponic vegetables, and I must say, they're not vegetables, basically. They don't taste enough. There's not enough taste in them. And I'm a human being. I have my biological ability to taste stuff, and I should use that as a guiding principle, and there's not enough of it. There could be one day, but there's not at the moment. And this is important because I believe that as a native of planet Earth, my taste system is variable. And you can say, and then you can say, you talk about terror and you have the arrogance, but what about the people who don't get anything to eat? The people who don't get anything to eat, in many studies have shown that when Westerners come in with our food systems and our grains and our helping, UNICEF and all that stuff, FAO, and we help them, they turn away from local wild food. Generation after generation, you can study in South America, how people forget about the wild food because the Westerners come with all their stuff. In Thailand, you have studies where people were using far less work hours, less time of work on collecting wild food than on digesting the food that the help organizations brought them. But they thought, because they come in an airplane and give me this from the other end of the world, it must be better. So they gave up the wild food. So I'm not so sure that giving up the terroir is a good idea. We have to navigate using our senses, and we have to trust ourselves and each other. And I think we started a few minutes late. Do I still have a few minutes?
You have 3 minutes.
I have 3 minutes. So I want to talk about commodities in my last few minutes here. Commodities is a concept that was in fact already discussed yesterday without the phrase being used. It came out of the Danish island of Samsø, which you may know about as a net exporter of renewable energy from all these windmills and stuff. And they build these windmills as a community thing. And they have many guests from all over the world studying their fantastic energy revolution. And the guests asked, how did you do this together? Tell us the story of the community. So they came, Søren Hermansen, who is the director of the Samsø Energy Academy, came to me and said, we have to produce something that will explain to people what a community is. So Søren and I sat down and wrote a book called Fællesskab, which is a Danish pun, which we tried to translate into an English pun in the Kindle version. Commodities. Commodities is commons that are governed by communities. When a community is together around a common, that is a commodity. And that, in our view, is the essential thing, because community in itself is a very fluffy word. It's just like children. It's the most wonderful thing in the world, the most irritating and annoying thing in the world. But it's beautiful because there's a reason for it. Communities must deal with something else for being good communities. And to do so, they have to deal with commons. Common resources like the meadows or the oceans or the atmosphere or the language or the culture or the silence in a train car, whatever it is, something that we share and nobody owns. And when communities govern commons, you have these commodities, which in a way is the future. You know, and you heard about the tragedy of the commons yesterday. You also heard about in an Ostrom study showing that actually it's very often so that the commons are better in self-organizing stuff than the market has been and the state has been. And in many ways you can say this is where the future lies, in the bottom-up strategy, not the headquarters strategy, local knowledge, local understanding of local food produce, of local plants, local animals, local insects, what is there, rather than this top-down study that people do from these scientific offices. It's all about civil society, people helping each other rather than, and being generous and sharing, rather than the headquarter solutions. And this civil society, where is it? It's there all the time. It's basically what glues together societies, even industrial societies, but we've ignored it like we've been ignoring the world. So many were my words, and I think we will have a little time also to discuss this.
Definitely. There is time for questions. Yes? You have one question? Just wait for me.
Maybe a quick very first thing. I don't see how this will work concretely. So if you make it concrete, so are we getting away of farms like grow, what grow, and we point people out to collect the food? Is that what?
No. First of all, it's about putting more emphasis into plants that can take care of themselves, that are perennial, that will be there for a long time. The same idea you find, for instance, in the permaculture tradition. So when you actually grow something and nurture something, it should be something with a future rather than something that forces you to ruin the soil every year. But if you then say the naive idea of just going out there and collecting, how much would there be if you did that? That is the point. There's a lot more. There's a long tradition, also in peasant culture, even of the European countries, of collecting wild stuff that we've entirely forgotten. So the point is, there's more out there, and there's also the possibility of using much more marginal lands this way. If we start trending that way, but it's not like from one day to the other you shoot all the farmers and then you go out collecting. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing let's orient our technological curiosity back in the flow of the wild stuff rather than into making it ever more artificial.
Hello, Tor. Thank you so much. It was very, very inspiring. I love the dichotomies of wild and cultivation on the other side. I had the privilege to write a case study about the app.
Not working anymore. I had the privilege to write a case study about an app called Cooperatives. And basically what it does is it maps out the wild edibles within Copenhagen. And it's a beautiful ideology. And what I found out from going out and doing field work in November, which is the biggest green park in Copenhagen, was that because of people's lack of skills with harvesting, for example, hawthorn, sea buckthorn, which was getting very popular because of November the Danish and so on, these bushes were actually not surviving from year to year. So I suggested a counter mapping. But so again, I'm talking about what are the solutions here, because there's got to be some kind of counter mapping going on.
Could everyone hear this? Yes. And this, of course, is a very important question. That when you go around saying take more interest in the wild stuff, you get that people have lost also their ability to deal with harvesting wild stuff without taking it all. In the old times, even the peasants would know that you don't chop down a tree to get firewood. You just take the branches of the tree, so you leave the root system. And if you go to Indians in British Columbia, they have a very beautiful and long word for how to keep things alive when you take away stuff from them. So of course, in any culture that's dependent on hunter-gathering, you have to have a culture and an ethics to this. And of course, we don't have in our culture because we've forgotten everything. So it's instrumental now that programs are made for how to involve people in using wild stuff without ruining it. And there's, for instance, there's a big program that started off now about the wild food with how to do classes for people, how to make this part of public education, and how to like you have for hunting, you actually have some rules and some stuff people need to do to learn stuff, and you would have to do that, of course. So it's basically about a culture that has been lost that we have to reestablish, and we have to reestablish before it's forgotten. And that's a huge societal challenge. Thank you.
We have a question here.
Hi. I was wondering and curious, you mentioned taste as a crucial factor, or it seemed to me you mentioned it as a crucial factor to evaluate, for example, hydroponic vegetables. Why is it, because it's your whole theme seems to me so profound, so I was really wondering why you put so much emphasis on taste as, for example, to nutritional value instead.
Basically, we are animals, and basically we are animals who are still here after millions and millions and actually billions of years of biological evolution. And of course, the animals that we have evolved from, like the mice and the rats and whatever, the monkeys, they do not have a nutrition scientist at hand to explore their environment. They have to rely on their taste and also their visual appreciation of stuff. And this is a matter of survival, basically. You have to learn to eat the right stuff and not the wrong stuff. And you have to have an idea of how much to eat and so on. And being animals, we have that as a very strong capability. Now, if you compare that to nutrition science, which is really a pre-science, it's not yet a science, the instruments we get from nutrition science are very rude and not very precise. Just one example. When you and I take in 1.5 tons of food and water every year, it's 1,500 kilograms. Then on the first day after New Year's Eve, we stand on the scale and we look, and it turns out that, shit, there's 1.5 kilograms more than last year. And we're very annoyed by that. But really, it's 1.5 kilograms out of 1,500 kilograms going through you. So it's the precision is 1 per mil. That's the 1/10%. That's much better than any calorie table calculator thing we do. So we are much more clever, and of course we have to be so. So that's why I'm saying if we're natives, we necessarily have systems that will tell us if it's good or bad. I'm not saying we should rely on that only. Of course we should listen to nutrition science. Of course we should listen to wonderful technological experiments. But most of all, we should ask ourselves, do I like this?
You have a final question? I think we should say many, many thank you. Okay. I think we should say very many thank you to Tor Nørretranders.